what I heard you say is that you went back into the relationship with your ex because you were dysregulated and maybe not completely resourced. And in doing that, you contributed to this dysfunctional system, and you really, really regret that.
Absolutely, I do. And it's a work in progress to have compassion. I have more compassion than I used to, but even there's a lot of healing and liberation in saying it out loud because I've admitted it to myself and I've admitted it with my sponsor, but saying it out loud feels healing too. I didn't know what else to do at the time. I felt like I had no choices. Um, and I hope one day that my kids will be able to understand why I made the choice that I did.
Hi, my name's Lawrence Joss, and welcome to the Family Disappeared podcast. Today we have a show for you, and this show was ridiculous. Our longest episodes we've taped so far. We have a panel of 3 parents plus myself, so 4 parents in total, and we're talking about the alienator in us. And I know that sounds really, really provocative, but we're really looking at our behavior through this journey where we've unwittingly, unknowingly, unintentionally contributed to the system of alienation, and how we've identified some of those behaviors, how we do things differently, and the richness of what our life looks like as we start to uncover the stuff and discover the stuff. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I'm on a total like whoa, like up there kind of thing. And yeah, and I really appreciate the panel's vulnerability and honesty and willingness to come out to serve the community, because it takes a lot of strength and energy to put your face and your voice out there and have these conversations. So thank you, and if you're new to the community, welcome. We talk a lot today about our free 12-step program, Parental Alienation Anonymous. I think we have 16 meetings a week now, and fantastic meetings, different secretaries and leaders at all the meetings. Try a bunch, try it on, see if it works for you. And if you like other groups or other stuff that you'd like to work on, go get them. Like, all the stuff we're talking about today is applicable to whatever you're doing for your own emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being. And phenomenal conversation. Please check out our website. We should have the brand new website up and a bunch of new resources and blogs and stuff from the Family Hope Project, which is art submissions that parents and grandparents and children submit about their journey and struggle with alienation, estrangement, and erasure. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit. Donate, consider a monthly donation, a yearly donation. It's all tax deductible. The more we're able to garner from our communities, the more we can make these services available for free, and extrapolate the services and bring you trainings on nonviolent communication, on empathy, on shame, on guilt, on so many different things. And that's a lot out of me, like usual. And thank you for coming out to play today. And let's jump into the show. Man, this is so complex and so painful. And there's been so many times that I want to explain to my kids what's happening. I want to point out things in the family system that just aren't normal. I'm like, how do you not see this thing happening? How do you not see that thing happening? And I really thought in a lot of situations that I was doing the right thing by having these conversations. And a lot of times I was just trying to move my emotional discomfort and my distress through my kids. And if they would just understand it, then my nervous system would be okay, then I would be okay. And those are the conversations we're having today, is where have we used our kids as a surrogate to regulate our nervous systems, or try to get them some information, or try to teach them something. Where have we been inappropriate, again, unintentionally, in this process? And a wonderful part about the conversation also is that there is forgiveness, there's compassion, there's love for ourselves. We're doing the best we can. So as you listen to the podcast, if anything comes up that you might be doing or have done, there's so much richness here to start adjusting course and have compassion. Like, I do the best I can today with what I have, and tomorrow it changes a little bit. So let's hear what these wonderful folks have to say. Wow, this is so cool to have you all back on the show, Anna, Stephen, and Julie. I'm really excited, and I know everyone out there is thinking, like, this is a really provocative question, and maybe they think that that's not useful to discuss, and it's crazy making, and why would we even want to think about that we might have had that we might have in some way contributed to the alienation and the the dysregulating of the kids' nervous systems, and maybe putting additional pressure on them, or maybe additional pressure on us or other stakeholders. So I'm really curious what's going to happen in this conversation, because I've got no idea. But we're going to be talking about the alienator in all of us, and what that looks like, and how that shows up. So I'm going to have everyone please qualify quickly. And for anyone out there, when I say the word qualifying, if you do land up trying out the free 12-step community, when we come to meetings, everyone kind of qualifies, and they let us know where they're at, and we get familiar with people. We get to have some kind of consistency, and we have safety in the room because everyone's qualifying, so we know everyone's in the right place. And it's really important, and we can track each other's growth and see changes depending on how we qualify. So generally we say our name, how many kids we have, and then what kind of contact we have. And for the purpose here, a lot of people are going to use, hey, I'm an alienated parent. Some people say I'm an estranged parent. Some people say I'm a reunited parent struggling with alienation. There's people all over the spectrum in the community. So we're going to do this quick little check-in. I'm going to start with Anna first, if you can please qualify, Anna.
Hi, Lawrence. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna, alienated mother of a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old. Very, very limited contact for the last coming up for 8 years.
Thank you so much, Anna. And Julie, if you could just qualify next, please.
Hi, I'm Julie, and I'm the mom of a 15-year-old boy. I was alienated from him when he was 13, and I'm regaining some contact with him. I also have a stepson who's 22, and we've had almost no contact with him for the last 2 years, although we did just get our first text message in 2 years.
Thank you so much, Julie. And Stephen, if you could please go ahead and qualify too.
I'm Steven. I am an alienated, estranged dad to a 25-year-old adult daughter, and alienated from a 19-year-old son. I have 5 children total, and then 2 stepdaughters who we have also dealt with alienating behavior on the other side of our family as well. So brief, occasional email contact with both my children, some text contact, and I've seen my son 3 times in person in 2024.
Fantastic, Stephen. Thank you for that. And I'm going to qualify here quickly to, my name's Lawrence. I'm an alienated father. I have 3 daughters. I have a 30-year-old that it's been 8 or 9 years with no contact, and a 27-year-old that had a little bit of texting conversations last year. And I have a 23-year-old I have regular contact with, and complete access to, and we have a wonderful relationship. And I have a couple grandkids I'm yet to meet. So that's what you'll hear at meetings. And as you hear, even with us qualifying, we got people partial contact, different contact, no contact, contact to some siblings. So you know what? Everyone's all over the spectrum, and some of us are rebuilding relationships with kids that we might not have had access to before. And I want to start off with like a really baseline question. Like, well, let's just say we came into Parental Alienation Anonymous, which is a free 12-step support group for anyone out there that's new to the community and just listening to that. And we come in here, well, let's say this. I came in here wanting to figure out how to fix my ex and get my kids to love me and get my family system back in order. And never once did I think that I was contributing in a really negative way to the situation. And we're calling this episode The Alienator in Me. And maybe it's estrangement or erasure. Like, use whatever word feels appropriate to you. But this is really looking at our part in the family system, and how we possibly contributed. So the baseline question I'm going to start with, and let's start with you, Julie. When you first got here, did you think like, hey, there's an alienator in me too? Was it even possibility of a thought that you might be contributing in a really negative way? Did you have some kind of view of that?
No, none whatsoever. And in fact, I brought up alienation as a possible problem within our relationship to the family therapist that was tasked with reunifying me with my son. And she said, "You're the alienator." And I was shocked and taken aback, and I wanted to slap her. Just like, what are you talking about? And now 2 years later, I can see where it's not one or the other, it's both. It's neither parent doing what they need to do to parent the child together. And and also allowing the child to have their own journey and experience each parent in their own way and not try to live the same experience each parent had with the other parent. And now I can see that my journey, my relationship with my son's father is entirely different from the relationship my son has with his father. And he may never see the side of his father that I saw. And that's a good thing. Let's hope that he never experiences that. And in any attempt I've made to, try to show him who his father really is, isn't beneficial to my child. And frankly, it's not beneficial to me either.
It's a lot you covered in that answer. Just to reflect back a little bit, the idea of going into therapy or talking to the therapist or any other stakeholder in the system and saying, hey, alienation exists, my ex is alienated, and to have that reflected back, hey, you're the problem, early on in this journey had to be really dysregulating and upsetting. And I could picture like that thing like, hey, I'm going to slap you. You know what I mean? Like that makes a lot of sense.
It had never occurred to me.
I think that's beautiful. And it's such a poignant part of our healing journey that we get to take a look at some of our behaviors. And just for anyone out there, we're not discounting what anyone else is doing. We're not saying that the other person in the relationship or the other parties in the relationship are great or good or bad or whatever. We're not even looking at that. We're just looking at ourselves because our behavior affects the children. It affects their environment. It affects how they react to stuff. So we want in recovery to kind of like work on these different things. And I love that you're talking about your evolution from then until now, that there's been a significant change and you're able to see more dimensions on how you show up in the relationship, Julie. I think that that's wonderful. And it sounds really healing and like you're healing because you're able to see that.
I am, definitely.
That is beautiful. And I'm going to ask you the same question, Stephen. When you first got here, did you have any inclination that you were contributing to the family system negatively in a significant way? Could you see some of these things that you might be able to see now?
I would have to agree with what Julie said, but maybe for a different reason. I was not aware of my part in the alienation story of my family because I was so devastated by the loss. So I lost a son at 10 days old. My oldest son is a surviving twin. So I've actually lost a child. And then losing my daughter, or the relationship with my daughter at the time of my ex and I separating. And then on the heels of that, 3 years ago, my son being alienated from me. That third, kind of like that third strike, I was just so devastated and filled with grief and sadness and depression that all I could see was what was happening to me. And in some ways, it's kind of selfish. In that it just felt so traumatic to me that I couldn't get beyond the trauma I was experiencing to be able to say, wow, how has this been for my kids? How have they experienced this? What trauma have they felt? I couldn't get there at first. And I spent a lot of time being really angry at my ex and with the things she was doing and how that was affecting my kids. But I couldn't see the deeper part of what my part was in the whole scenario. That's kind of like next level, and I wasn't at that level yet. So, but coming, 18, 19 months down the road of being in program, I definitely have a much different view of that now, for sure. Absolutely.
Thank you for that, Stephen. You bring up such an incredibly important point about our own nervous system and our dysregulation and our fragmentation when a lot of us find ourselves in these situations. Like we can't necessarily function on some level. Some days are difficult to get through, or a lot of days are difficult to get through to actually see the impact we're having on the kids is almost impossible. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And also building, like you're building step one on step two, step three. And the more we get, the less capacity we have to notice a lot of things that are going on. And yeah, I appreciate you acknowledging that. And I'm excited to hear what you've learned and what you want to share with the community in a couple minutes. And Anna, I'm going to ask you the same question. Did you have any inclination about your part or what was going on for yourself?
Thank you, Lawrence. No, at the beginning, I had no concept that I had contributed anything to the alienation and the dysfunction in the family. I'm just thinking about what it was like when I first joined community. I could barely string a sentence together. I was in shock, I was in denial, I was in grief. I felt very traumatized. And it's only I'm 3 years in the community now, it's only having done the work that I can see a bigger picture and see myself as part of that picture and identify inherited dysfunction, and how the way I showed up and sometimes didn't show up when I was being almost inactive, how that contributed to the alienation. If I'd heard if I'd had any inkling at the beginning that I was going to figure out that I was an alienator, I probably would have left. I don't think I could. My nervous system could have handled it. It's really interesting to think about.
Thank you for that, and I like the word denial, because when a lot of us get here, like, there's no way this could be happening, then there's no way this is real. So denial is a really important part of coming back to ourselves and coming back to reality, is actually unwinding what denial is and why it even exists. So I think that's a really important part of the conversation we're going to be having, Anna, and the grief and the dysregulation and all that stuff is real for so many of us. And I would say for me, when I first got here, it wasn't about me looking at my part. I didn't have the capacity, I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the resources. My coping mechanism sucked. My family of origin was always reactive and pointing outward energy instead of looking inward. And I had to learn that there was a different way to exist. So we're going to jump into the questions now, and I suggest wherever you are, put on a seatbelt. This is going to be really cool and really interesting. Just the beginning's great. I want to listen to that again. So I'm going to jump in just to provocative question after provocative question. So the first question is going to be, how have your actions, behaviors, interactions contributed to alienation, estrangement between you and your children? And can you please give like one or two examples of what might have happened? And let's start with you first, Stephen.
Okay. Gosh, there's so many. How do we choose just a couple? I can share just a story that might be explain a situation. So my oldest son, who is 27 and high functioning autistic, who I have full contact with. We meet for lunch about once a week, and he came down to the car one afternoon, and he got in the car, and he looked really serious, and I was like, "Is everything okay?" And he goes, "Well, no." And I said, "Okay, well, what's going on?" And he said, "Well, I was with mom and your sister this weekend, and mom said that she thinks you have mental illness." And I looked at him, and this is back good 6 months ago, so I definitely would approach this differently now, maybe 8 months ago. And he said, and he said, I'm starting to believe them, Dad. And I said, "Oh, okay. Well," I said, what behaviors have you seen that I exhibit that would say that I have mental illness?" And he's like, "Well, I don't know, but mom just said you have, she said you have mental illness." And I said, "Well," and so this was the part that I would like to take back. And so I said to him, I said, "Well, why don't you, when you next see mom, why don't you ask her what the alien, or what the mental, what things are visible to her that show that I have mental illness?" And I was like, okay, so that ended, and it was kind of tense, and the conversation ended, and I reflected that back to somebody in program, and the person in program said, in the kindest and most loving way, but yet direct, said, basically, "What the F do you think you're doing?" in a kind way, and said, "Here you are in a program working on alienation, and you just used alienating behavior on your son." And it hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was a great learning moment. It has changed me in many ways. But I did not realize that behavior was simply putting him in the middle and alienating him from both myself and my ex. And it was horrible. And so I had to, I went back, I made amends within a day, went back and apologized to him. Of course, he's a wonderful soul and he forgave me and said, "It's okay, Dad." But that would be one significant example. I could add others, but that may be enough time there to just describe that one.
Yeah, I think that's sufficient. I'm going to ask everyone for one example and a little story if you have that. And just the idea how we put these kids in these situations that put so much stress on them emotionally and maybe even physically at times. And naturally, they're going to get confused and shut down and push and do whatever they want to do. But I just want to reflect something back, Stephen, that I think is really interesting. You're telling the story and you're smiling. Right. And it's such an interesting thing in recovery when we start working on ourselves. Like we have these painful situations, and yet we find a tunnel or a way through it and we find some light. And it becomes kind of like something we share to change the system. And we're able to laugh about it and kind of, what's the word that I'm thinking of? We get to have it digest in our systems, and then we change. And by us changing, the family system starts to change. Would you agree that that would be real for you?
Absolutely. That smile comes from the beauty of being able to see my own character defect or foible, but also realizing that because of the 12 steps, I was immediately able to correct and make amends and go forward in a different way. And that's really what the 12 step program is about. And so I don't have to hold on to that guilt and the shame. I can go, that wasn't the best way to show up. And I'd like to show up differently in the future, and I'm going to. So yeah, absolutely.
It's a powerful story. And for people that aren't familiar with the 12 steps are a framework that we just start to look at our behavior and work on ourselves. And we're able to take care of situations where we're causing harm in a much quicker and efficient way. And like what Stephen described, like within a day, because he had support, because he had community, he wasn't going to people that were really upregulated in his family system. He was going to people that actually could support him. And within a day, he was able to make an amends to his son, which I think is phenomenal because I know for me, like sometimes it's a year later that I'm like, oh crap, that wasn't great. So I love that. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful recovery story. And I'm going to move on to you next, Anna. So Anna, can you give us just one example where you might have contributed to the alienation or the estrangement within the system with the kids?
Thank you, Lawrence. I can. I'm sitting here thinking, I want you to call on Julie next because I can feel this is emotional for me. I can feel I'm holding my breath because the example that I came up with was I left my ex-husband twice. So the first time I left, we ended up getting back together. I ended up agreeing to try to reconcile with him. And it was the worst decision I could have made. And I had a sense of it at the time, but also at the time I was so petrified of being on my own that I overrode any sense I had of being, I was going to say a good mother, I hate that term, but feeling like I was making choices that would be helpful for my kids. I made a decision that worked for my then very dysregulated nervous system, and I knew I was walking back into an abusive situation. And not only was I walking back into it, but my kids were as well. And still I did it, and it was a mistake from the beginning. And it definitely made the situation worse for everyone, and especially for my kids. And it took me another 3 years after that to get the courage and be desperate enough to think that I needed to step away again. But I have no doubt that that contributed in a really significant way to the alienation. And yeah, I can't have that time back. In recovery, I get to learn how to have compassion for myself, but that doesn't mean that there's not a part of me that doesn't wish I could take that period of time away and save some of that pain more for my kids and for me. So yes, that's why I wanted you to go to Julie next, because this is where the work gets deep and where it gets hard, and it feels good to say it out loud, but it also makes me feel ashamed and revolted by the choice that I made, where I felt like I didn't have many choices, but I mean I did, and I was the adult in the room. So yeah, this work is hard.
Well, thank you for sharing that intimate detail. And what I heard you say is that you went back into the relationship with your ex because you were dysregulated and maybe not completely resourced, and in doing that, you contributed to this dysfunctional system, and you really, really regret that.
Absolutely, I do. And it's a work in progress to have compassion. I have more compassion than I used to, but even there's a lot of healing and liberation in saying it out loud, because I've admitted it to myself and I've admitted it with my sponsor, but saying it out loud feels healing too. I didn't know what else to do at the time. I felt like I had no choices. Um, and I hope one day that my kids will be able to understand why I made the choice that I did.
Thank you for that. And Julie, you're next. Do you have a recollection of a place where you've contributed to the system and some of the dysfunction, and maybe have a regret or two?
Of course. Um, First, Anna, I want to acknowledge that you're not alone. And I left my husband 3 years before I really left my husband. Um, and we do it for various reasons. And I think my thought process then and my thought process all along my motherhood journey is I'm genuinely trying to do the best thing for my child. And I made the decision to leave my husband, but allow my son to have a relationship with him. And I really felt like that's the opposite of alienation. And, I worked really hard to make sure that my child could continue a relationship with his father. But what I still didn't understand then, and I now understand, is that my child's relationship with his father might never look like what my relationship looked like. But I felt I had to protect my son from the side of his father that I saw. Um, I saw drug abuse and alcoholism and womanizing, and I felt confident that at some stage of my son's journey, he would meet that side of his father. I remember the day that I stopped putting up a false front of, always speaking positively of daddy and never saying a negative word. And it was the day that my son, he was like 6 years old, and he said, "Daddy lies. Daddy's a liar." And, 100 things ran through my head because I want to say, uh-huh. But I asked him, I was like, "Well, why do you say that?" And he said, "Well, daddy says he doesn't smoke. And I know he smokes because I went in the garage and I found a wine bottle full of cigarette butts. And so I know daddy smokes." In that moment, I had to decide what I'm going to do because, in Al Anon, which is a different program, but in that program, we say secrets keep you sick. And I had learned that I'm not going to keep his secrets anymore. And so I don't want to hide. I don't want my son to have to hide from the truth. And I just said, well, if you think that daddy's lying to you and you have found evidence that he probably is. And you should trust your gut. And I felt I was protecting my son from his father's gaslighting. And I think there's an argument to be made that that was not the wrong reaction. But at the same time, it started a process where I stopped covering and stopped keeping my ex-husband's secrets. And I didn't just let the truth reveal itself on its own. I felt like I had to help my son see his father for what he really is in order to protect him. Because I felt like I had entered into my relationship with my ex-husband just so naive and so, my nickname when we met was Pollyanna because everybody said I was just so innocent and naive. And I thought they were ridiculous. And looking back, I go, oh, yeah, I guess I was. And so I was trying to protect my son from that. But I've had to learn that my son has to have his own journey with his dad. And he has to find out what relationship he wants to have and how he's going to handle whatever he comes up against with in that relationship. And I can't control what that relationship looks like. I can't control what that journey looks like for him. And he may get hurt. And I can't stop it. And so I really have to take a step back and stop trying to control this journey that my son is on, because you just want to protect your kid. You want to wrap them in bubble wrap, but you can't. You just can't. They're going to have their own experiences and their own journey, and I've realized that my effort to protect him backfired, and that puts space between me and my son. And he doesn't see his dad the way that I see his dad. So he sees me as the bad guy, that, you think dad's a terrible person, therefore you're the bad guy. And I've had to realize that his dad isn't so terrible as a father. He may have not been great as my husband, but he's not a terrible dad. And my son and his dad are going to have their own experience. And I have to step back from that. And I can't control it. And I can't, I just have to let it unfold and let him go on his own journey.
Thank you for that. And I'm just going to take one little thread in there that I heard that's really important. And the thread is like, I heard you saying that you're coloring your ex in a certain ways to educate, to soften the blow for your son, something to that degree, and that in doing that, it created some tension between you and your son, because instead of focusing on the relationship with your son, some of the focus was taken off and pushed in a different direction, which I think a lot of us experience in alienation when our partner is trying to color us in a particular way. And it's such a subtle nuance that I think all of us have experienced, where we try to color our partner in a negative way to some extent, whether in defense, reaction, whatever it is. But that's the gist of what you're saying, and that you've come to realize in program.
Absolutely. And it's just not, I can't use that paintbrush. It's not mine to use.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really profound. And me personally, I have been guilty of that. I've tried to discuss family systems with my kids and talk about the cognitive aspect of, well, what's going on, and educate them about how family systems work and stuff. And in the same sentences, have definitely colored their mother in a particular way, and it's hurtful. And I've had pushback like everyone else's has, and it's actually created distance instead of closeness. And it's the exact same toolkit that my ex picks up with me, trying to create closeness with the kids by creating distance with me and the kids. And eventually I think that will change too, and they will be looking at that, possibly not. And I'm just going to ask you this follow-up question, Stephen, because your example was a little not quite as spread out and complex as some of the other stuff we just spoke about. You're in your car with your son. He says something to you about, hey, mental health, you're not in the greatest position. If you could redo that conversation now with a little bit of more interpersonal work, more support, community around you, like, how would you potentially have reframed that conversation? What would you have done differently?
Yeah, I've thought about that quite a bit, Lawrence. And a couple things, came to mind very quickly. And one is, obviously with more program under my belt, my first thought would be a response such as, Harrison, how did that make you feel? Or Harrison, how did you feel about that when that happened at mom's house? That would be one. Two would be, after the follow up to how are you feeling about that? Would you like to discuss your feelings about that? Or would you like to share your feelings about how that made you feel? Both of those things obviously would be person centric to the alienated child, right? Now the thing is, my 27-year-old, he actually sees the situation most clearly out of all of my children. And he is the one that society would tell you, based on being high functioning autistic, that might see it the least, which is kind of amazing and a whole nother thing we could spend a show talking about. But I didn't ask those questions, but given that back, I would have asked those to ask what his experience is, instead of thinking about what my experience was.
Thank you for that, Stephen. I think that's a wonderful example. And just throwing in a little bit more of an MVC lens for people that are new to the community. And MVC is nonviolent communication. which is an empathy-based form of communication. If you're in a situation like that where, hey, your son's saying, hey, I heard that you're mentally ill, a really great tool is like, what's he feeling? So like I would say, oh, I'm guessing that makes you scared that your dad could potentially be mentally ill. Or I'm like, oh wow, that sounds really concerning. I'd be concerned if someone said something about my dad like that. And then you give the kid an opportunity to go, yeah, I'm really concerned. I'm scared. Like what's going on? And by leading with empathy, it gives us an opportunity to attune, and attune is just like an emotional connection where both people are present, and then the conversation can transform. But it's such a great, I love that example. It's just so wonderful, and there's so much cool stuff to work in there.
I think it's really important. The other thing that I would have done is to allow him to express his experience of that without me having I don't have to. I could just end the conversation with, wow, that sounds really difficult, or wow, that sounds challenging, or wow, that sounds like you handled that really well. I don't have to then go to the next step, which is, well, here's my opinion on it. I don't need to do that. I can just stop right there, let him have his experience, and end of story, end of conversation. And we can go talk about, hey, let's go grab some ice cream or whatever. Right. And I always, there's that push to feel like I have to tell my side of the story. And that has got me in trouble over and over and over again. So just wanted to add that piece.
That's a wonderful nuance to add to it, and by continuing the conversation, sometimes we dig a deeper hole, and the kids need to know about it. We start to put the onus on them to take care of us, to make us feel better because someone's calling us crazy, and the kid starts to shrink and they lose themselves, and then they get to that place where they got to cut off or they got to split because they can't tolerate the conversation emotionally and developmentally. So I love you bringing up that point, Stephen, and I'm going to use this to kind of like segue back, and this next question is going to be, in what ways have your family of origin, so a family of origin is the family that you grew up with, your mom, your dad, your parents, your siblings, like in what ways has your family of origins, like coping mechanisms or strategies, contributed in some way to the alienation in your family system, or the estrangement in your family system? And if you give us one example, that'd be wonderful. And we're going to start with you first this time, Anna.
Thank you, Lawrence. What really stood out for me when thinking about this question was, and what I've learned too in program, is that so many of my relationships have been codependent in nature, and that was definitely at front and center in my relationship with my ex-husband and also with my kids. So I didn't have a sense of self. I lived through my husband before the kids came along, and then when the kids came along, all my energy went into them. And I was fortunate enough to be a stay-at-home mum when they were little, when they were in elementary school. And so I lived my life through them, and I was on a constant search for external validation. And when I'd focused all the energy on my kids, my ex got left out of the equation. So in terms of having a relationship, husband and wife, that it wasn't on the table. Didn't even know how to do it. I certainly didn't have the energy to do it. But all that codependency for me, when I look at it now, it made me, I didn't really have a presence. Everything that I did was focused on what everyone else needed and what was going to make everyone else happy and meet everyone else's needs. And so thinking about it's made me kind of think that I wasn't an absent parent, but I had no personality. I never voiced my opinion. And I can't help but think that had a negative impact on my kids and my ex-husband, and that did stem from how I was raised. That's what I learned how to do, and that's what my parents knew how to do as well. So that intergenerational trauma piece is there, and I had no idea it was happening when I was living through it. But program has helped me to identify that.
So Anna, what I'm hearing is like in your family, you're pretty submissive and enmeshed and codependent and taking care of everyone else and making sure everyone else was getting along and kind of abandoning yourself. And that contributed to stuff. But I would say my follow-up question, in your family of origin, what did that strategy do for you? Was that a survival mechanism? What was going on in your family so we can kind of track that from our family to this adult relationship that we have, so folks out there listening can kind of see what that trajectory looks like and maybe have an aha moment?
I think the codependency in my biological family, it was a survival mechanism, but it was also a way for me to, I didn't feel connected to anyone anyway, but it was what I was seeing modeled for me. So I thought it was the only strategy I could adopt to at least feel like there was some sense of belonging. I didn't have any sense of belonging in my biological family. So I kind of towed the line, if that makes sense, in order to at least feel like I was being the good girl, I was doing the right thing, I was meeting everyone else's expectations. In essence, it didn't work, but I thought that was the only thing that I could do because that's what everybody else was doing.
Right. So what I'm hearing, you kind of like abandon yourself just to fit into the family system, and everyone in the family system really wasn't there, even though their physical bodies were there. No one was present, and part of that seems like it got carried out into your adult relationship.
Absolutely, that's what it felt like. So it was what happened in the family that I created felt like an echo of what I'd grown up with.
Thank you for that, Anna. And it's so important and poignant when we look back at our family of origin and then we go out into the real world and we recreate these systems. And some of us at a very young age, some of us at a little bit more mature age, but we're still bringing in what we've learned into the family. And then that's how we raise our kids. And better than our parents, but they're still really, really entangled with the intergenerational stuff that's going on. So, Julie, same question for you. What did you find from your family of origin that might have been brought into your family that was just a coping mechanism or strategy that you've just used to survive your whole life?
It's interesting. So my mom's second marriage. And so my brother and sister from her first marriage. And I grew up with their dad. I thought he was my uncle. And they would go to his house every other weekend and I would go with them because at first I didn't understand why my brother and sister got to go into the mountains every other weekend and I didn't get to go. And so my mom said, well, you got to take her too. And he did. Her ex-husband took me too. And I thought that was normal. And so you would think that the model I had was, one big happy family that we all have to get along and we all have to co-parent. But there is an underlying theme that I get from my mother of you're either with me or you're against me. And in my alienation journey that I've been on the last 2 years, the message I've repeatedly gotten from my mom is walk away. Walk away from your son. He's not with you. And I realize that is a message that I got throughout my childhood, that you shouldn't for 1 second put up with anybody that doesn't align with you fully. And I realized that I put that on my son, that in order to align with me, he had to be against his father. And I never said those words to him, but I realized that must have been, an unspoken message and one that he couldn't handle. His dad is his dad. And it's interesting now to have these conversations with my mom. There's somebody else in my life who's having a hard relationship with their mother. And my mother said about this situation, I don't understand why he's so devoted to his mother. He should just walk away. It's like, Mom, that's his mom. He can't just walk away from his mother. But I see now that was obviously, that's how she gets by. That's her coping mechanism. And I learned it. And the message I received is the people in your life have to align with you and against your enemies. And that's not a healthy way of being. The great thing about this program is that not only can I now see that, but I can still have a relationship with my mom, even though she says some things that I totally disagree with and think are pretty far out there. But I've learned to see her in a whole new light where I can accept that that's her coping skill. That's what she developed. That is what kept her going through her life. I don't agree with it, but that's none of my business. I can hear her and do things my own way and not sever my relationship with her just because I disagree with her.
Mm. I love that. And I love that strategy that you're bringing up. You're with me, you're against me. We're a family unit. What happens in the house stays in the house. Like that whole programming that happens and causes divisiveness, and people get kind of like put in the no pile or something like that. And yeah, that sounds like a really challenging dynamic to unpack and uncover and unwind, because naturally it would flow into all our other relationships as we're growing up. And what I'm hearing you say, programs really giving you an opportunity to reflect on that and giving you some compassion and spaciousness with your mother, where you're okay with her being that way and you don't have to be that way anymore. That's beautiful, and just such a great common theme that I think so much of us experience. And Stephen, same question for you: family of origin strategy, coping mechanisms that you brought into your next family life, your next family journey. Wow, wow, and wow. I just want to keep talking to these people. What a great conversation. And just listening to the folks that are sharing today, you can hear the work that they're doing on themselves. You know what I mean? And the time that it's taken to do this work. And it's an evolution. We don't just come up with this idea today that maybe we're contributing in some ways to this dysfunction. As we start to clearly identify these things, our lives start to change. And you're hearing, Julie talking about getting her child back, but just doing counterintuitive stuff by not having to defend her position or attack or get other people to see things her way. And in surrendering that, you know what I mean? Like other people are okay with their beliefs and their systems, and maybe some of that stuff is true too. It creates space to actually recreate her relationship with her son. So exciting. And Stephen and Anna share so many different stories where they're talking about those same components. What a great show. And thank you for coming out to listen. Parental Alienation Anonymous is our free 12-step program. Show notes list that. They list the Family Hope Project. They list how to donate to the 501c3 nonprofit, which is us, Parental Alienation Anonymous, Parental Alienation Advocates, a bunch of other resources in the show notes. And wow, 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 wow. Thanks for coming out to play today. And in case no one else has told you yet today, I love you. And this is a journey of journeys. This is a lesson of lessons. This is parenting in the most extreme situations that turn into just such wonderful opportunities for us to heal and potentially change our family systems and be marvelous parents in a marvelous different kind of way. And not saying we were marvelous before, but we're just being different marvelous. And that's it. Happy days. Second part of the show is maybe better than the first part of the show. So make sure to come out and play for that one too. Thank you. Bye bye.